Good morning, macro students. I say good morning because it's 7:22 a.m. right now here for me, and I'm ready to roll and get going with some macro. All right, so right now we are discussing Module 7, Changes in Equilibrium. It says what causes changes in equilibrium and what are the results of those changes. So we discussed in Module 6 supply, and then we put supply and demand together into the supply and demand curve, which is something that we'll be using a lot here in macroeconomics class and in all of econ. That's kind of like really kind of your basic textbook econ stuff. All right, so it's going to say what happens when the demand curve shifts. So we're going to go through what would happen if there's a decrease in demand and an increase in demand. So, there could be some sort of a scenario that happens. It could be, for example, like for a decrease in demand, what would happen to the what would happen if the demand for shoes decreased? And then we'll see. All right, so we start out all of these graphs the same way. We put in our supply curve. Remember, S supply, up. The word up is in supply, so it's going up. D for demand, D for down. P and Q. And then we put in our equilibrium point. We start out every graph that way. And then we're also going to, from our equilibrium point, put a dotted line horizontally over to our price axes. And that is where the price is. And then we put a dotted line down, and that is where the quantity is. So if we had numbers on this chart, whatever those two numbers were, that's what that would be. Okay, so it says a decrease in demand. So that is saying that demand decreases. Now, remember from Module 5 what a decrease in demand looks like? A decrease is always a leftward shift. Some of you are writing that in your notes, right? That reminder, decrease is always a leftward shift. So decrease in demand means we're going to move to the left, and remember, quantity demanded is a point. But demand is a whole line, so we're going to have a whole new line. So let's draw in our new demand curve to the left of our old demand curve. We're going to call our old demand curve, or our first demand curve, D1, which means that now we have an equilibrium point 1, and we have a price 1, and we have a quantity 1. And then our new demand curve to the left of our old demand curve, that's going to be demand curve 2, or D2. So now we have a new equilibrium point, E2. We have a new price, P2, and we have a new quantity, Q2. And then it says here, result. Well, the result, what happened to the price? We look here, price went down. So the result is the price went down, and the quantity, the amount available, the amount that the companies are going to make, the amount that you'll find in the store, the quantity is also going to go down. And let's think about that for a moment. Let's say that there is a product and it becomes less popular. Well, something becoming less popular will cause the demand for it to go down. Well, won't things that become less popular and people don't really want to buy as much anymore, doesn't it sort of make sense then that the price would go down and there would be less of it available? So we can see that in the real world, that when the demand decreases, the price will often drop and the quantity available will also drop. All right, let's go here to increase in demand. So we start the same way every time. Okay, supply, demand, equilibrium. Let's label these number 1 because we know they're going to be our first ones. So here we have our first price, our equilibrium 1, and our quantity 1. And then we're going to draw in an increase in demand. But you know what? Before we even do that, let's go through and draw in our basic graphs for each one of these, because we always start that way. We always start with your basic supply and demand curve. Okay, back up here. All right, so it says we're going to draw on an increase in demand, which increase is always a rightward shift. You might be writing that down. Increase is a rightward shift. So to the right of our old demand curve, we're going to put our new demand curve, which we labeled D2. And now we have a new equilibrium. And remember, the equilibrium point determines the price and the quantity. So from our equilibrium come our price and our quantity. And so the result is that the price increased and the quantity increased. And that makes sense to us because if something becomes more popular, they can raise the price on it and you'll find more of it out in the stores. All right, what happens when the supply curve shifts? So decrease in supply. Now here when you're shifting supply, it's really important to think in terms of left and right because sometimes we start thinking up and down and then we get really confused, okay? A decrease is a leftward shift. So that would be over here. You draw it parallel to your old supply curve. And now we have a second equilibrium point. The equilibrium point tells us what the price will be and it tells us what the quantity will be. And we can see here the price went up and the quantity went down. Right? The quantity started here and it went there. That's down. Okay, over here, increase in supply, increases to the right. Some people get really confused by that because they're like, that looks like it's below it. Wouldn't that be a decrease? Remember, think left and right. Left and right. Okay, so now we have our second equilibrium point, which means we have our second price and our second quantity. And I'm realizing here that I wrote an E instead of a Q. Sorry about that. Okay, and the result is that the price went down and the quantity went up. So when there is an increase in the supply of a product, the price will go down and of course there'll be more of it available. Okay, page 2. All right, so this one says, what happens when both the supply and demand curves shift at the same time? So the question here, it says, what if supply and demand both go up? There are 3 possibilities. If there's a question, it says, what will happen to the price and quantity if the supply and demand both increase? There are 3 possibilities. If supply and demand increase by the same amount. All right, so before we even get started, let's draw in our basic supply and demand curve for all 3 of these. P1, Q1, alrighty. And of course, pause the video if you need more time to get that done. All right, so if they both increase by the same amount, they're both going to go up, well, you want to try to make the changes in both of them the same size. So what I mean by that is here is my increase in demand, and I'm going to increase supply as well. So I made this increase, about that wide. So I want to make my increase in supply about that wide as well. And Now here's where it gets tricky because people are like, uh-oh, where is my second equilibrium point? Because they look and they see 1, 2, 3 different spots where lines cross. So your second equilibrium point is where the second supply curve meets the second demand curve. So here is our second supply curve. Here's our second demand curve. They meet right here. So that is where your second equilibrium point is going to be. Now look at this. What happened to price? The price stayed the same. What happened to quantity? The quantity increased. So the result is that price stayed the same, quantity went up. Okay. Number 2, what happens if supply goes up and demand goes up, but supply goes up by more than demand goes up? So supply going up by more than demand goes up, we can think of that as supply is going to go up a lot, demand is going to go up a little. So we want to make that as exaggerated as we can in our chart. If you try to like make supply go up this much and demand go up this much, meaning like they're not like obviously different when you look at it, your graph is going to be hard to read. So in this scenario, supply is going to go up a lot. So draw it going up a lot. And demand's going to go up, but just by a little. So just make that one little. And then where the S2 and the D2 meet, that's your second equilibrium point, which determines your second price and your second quantity. So the result is that the price went down and the quantity went up. This scenario I see every year on Valentine's Day because Valentine's Day people buy a lot of flowers, but the flowers can be really cheap and they're like everywhere, you know, they're like at the gas station for $5 and all that. And so for Valentine's Day, the demand for flowers goes way up. Like there's a huge demand for flowers on Valentine's Day compared to other days of the year. But then the supply, they really crank out that supply of flowers. So you can like the price in a lot of places for some of those flowers will actually go down if they increase that supply by a lot. All right, now here is one where supply and demand are both going to increase, but demand's going to go up by more than supply. So demand's going to go up a lot this time. So make demand the really big increase or shift to the right, and supply the really small increase or shift to the right. And there's our second equilibrium point, which determines our new price and our new quantity. So we see the result there is that price will go up and quantity will go up. Okay, now if we look at all 3 of these scenarios together, what if supply and demand both go up? And I said there's 3 possibilities. Well, one of the possibilities is that the price will stay the same, but quantity will go up. This one, price will go down, but quantity will go up. And this one, price will go up, but quantity will go up. So the 3 possibilities, it's that the price could do who knows what, but the quantity is always going to go up. So 3 possibilities. Price can stay the same, go up, or go down. Quantity will always go up. Okay. Page 3. Okay. Page 3 is what if supply goes up and demand goes down. So before we even start, we're going to draw in our supply curves and our demand curves and our equilibrium point and our price 1 and our Q1 for each one of these. So go ahead and do that 3 times. Make sure you're labeling correctly. Sometimes we get our supply curve and our demand curve mixed up, or we get our P's and our Q's mixed up. All right, so this one, supply is going to go up and demand is going to go down, but by the same amount. So I'm going to draw supply going up, and I can see how far away I made my lines. So I'm going to try to make that same distance for my next one. By the same amount, demand's going down, so that's to the left. And I'm going to try to make it the same. And when it's the same, when like the two things go up and down at, you know, the same levels, you're going to have something that's even. So this quantity should be even. If it doesn't look even on your graph because you didn't make like the lines the same distance apart, just make your dot bigger and it'll even out. So here's our second price. So the result is that price went down and quantity stayed the same. Next one, price goes up by more than demand goes down. So price is going to go up a little, or I said price. I meant supply. Supply goes up by more than demand goes down. So supply is going to go up a lot and demand is going to go down a little. And remember to put your second equilibrium point where those two, the S2 and the D2 meet. So here's our new price and here's our new quantity. So in this scenario, the price went down and the quantity went up. And then number 3,